4 times a day, a nurse pumps liquid food directly into Christine Darley-Jones's stomach. Without it, she would die, which is what she would have wanted. Everyone knows that is what she would have wanted, because Christine Darley-Jones said so in a living will, a clearly written direction to her doctors.
I, Christine Ann Darley-Jones, declare at a time when I am of sound mind that if at any time the following circumstances exist, namely that I suffer from severe and lasting brain damage and I have become unable to participate effectively in decisions about my medical care, then my directions are as follows. I am not to be subjected to any medical intervention or treatment aimed at prolonging or sustaining my life.
But the validity of a living will or advance directive has never been tested in a British court. So although everyone knows what Mrs. Darley-Jones wanted, doctors have taken no notice.
She could have been dead if they'd have followed the advance directive.
And that would have been better?
Oh, yes, yes. Yes, Chrissy would not have wanted this.
We're talking about a girl who has made it very, very clear what she wants to happen. I mean, you couldn't be clearer. She's been very precise about the circumstances in which she no longer wishes to live.
At present, with Mrs. Darley-Jones, caring for her does not include removing her gastrostomy tube, which at the moment is the only way I would legally have of complying with what appear to have been her wishes some years ago.
Christine Darley-Jones is 46. She will never recover. She will spend the rest of her life in hospital. 12 months ago, Christine Darley-Jones was a highly successful executive, used to responsibility and to taking decisions.
Jasper, can I stick with the 55 for the minute and say that that would cover the audit and the acquisition advisory service? Now,
she had a senior position in the city, helping people to insure against the unexpected. Her advance directive was her insurance against those things she found abhorrent, dependence and indignity. She signed it in July 1992 after careful thought.
She never took any decision lightly. She would think sometimes weeks before making a decision, but then when she'd, made that decision, having thought about it so well, that she would stick by it, yes.
I remember noticing about her a sense of relief that she'd actually done that. And her nature is, well, I've done that, that's now in place, and that'll happen.
8 months after she'd signed her advance directive, Tony Darley-Jones drove his wife to a private hospital. She'd developed a persistent cough, and doctors wanted to examine her throat under general anaesthetic. The operation was scheduled to last 10 minutes.
We went into the hospital, I think, just as a day patient. And the nurse told me later on that she walked up in a normal way, skipping and jumping and saying, come on, let's get on with it, I've got to get home. We were due home at about 4:30, 5 o'clock. And that's the last time I ever saw her as my Chrissy. The ENT specialist was standing over me saying, I've got some bad news. There's been a medical accident and your wife is in intensive care. And I went up to see her, and there she was with about 15 tubes stuck out of her. And she was deaf, dumb, blind, and on a pump, and on a heart machine. I mean.
Christine Darley-Jones had had a massive heart attack. It took repeated electric shocks to restart her heart. Surgeons continued their struggle for 40 minutes. In the end, her body was saved, but most of her brain had died.
I knew her wishes, we discussed them many times, and I wanted them to switch that machine up.
You told them
I
that,
told them
that
then
she had made an advance
She
directive.
made advance directive, and would they please turn the machines off?
And what was their reaction?
They told me to go away. It wasn't worth the paper it was written on. You're treated a bit like as if you're a bit thick, and we know best, and you know, almost godlike. And you do what we say. Right now, this is our Chrissy and not yours. And we know best.
The doctors acted in what they believed were Mrs. Darley-Jones's best interests then as a patient, irrespective of wishes expressed earlier as a healthy person.
Was not the real cost to us.
Christine Darley-Jones had lost her control over her future, the very thing she believed her advance directive would protect. Today she is cared for here at what used to be called the Royal Hospital for Incurables in South London. The cost of her care is met by the National Health Service. She is visited every day by her husband.
Hello, darling. Hello, darling. Hello. Hello, sweetheart. Oh, well. What have you been up to?
Yeah.
Yes, what have you been up to?
Yeah.
Yes, have you?
Yeah.
Have you had a good day?
Yes.
Oh, good. What have you been doing?
Yeah.
Yes, yeah. What have you been doing? Yes. And you're going to speak to me? Come on. Hey, Chrissy. That's the noise of tigers make, isn't it? Kiss, kiss.
It wasn't just a marriage, we were soulmates. The love grew more as the years went by. The trouble with Chris now is she looks perfect and doesn't look as if there's anything wrong with her. She's 75–80% brain dead.
So, shall we go? Have a cup of tea? Go on, let me have a fag. I haven't had a fag for 2 hours. Okay. What a lot of fun. Yes. Yes. No. Oh, sweet.
She certainly doesn't have dignity now. Whether she's aware or not that she has no dignity, I don't know. She's doubly incontinent, she's fed through a tube in her tummy, she needs 24-hour medical attention. She's 12 hours in bed and 12 hours in a wheelchair. The next thing to be in a vegetable. Yeah.
Precisely what she wanted to avoid.
Precisely what she wanted to avoid, yeah.
Christine Darley-Jones, the incapacitated patient, has no view. She is lost in a vacuum in which no one is sure what is right.
The long-term prognosis is really, to all intents and purposes, she's not going to get really any better than she is now.
I think it's likely that she will remain as dependent as she is now, indefinitely.
Indefinitely.
So that I think at the moment one has to say that we don't feel that things are going to change dramatically, but that doesn't mean that we aren't going to go on looking and taking care. I'm increasingly confused as to whether our ability to save life doesn't create more problems than it solves. We do have a tremendous capacity now as a medical profession, medical and nursing professions, to save life, regardless of what may or may not be ahead of that patient. Many of the patients that I look after, one wonders how much easier it might have been for everybody concerned, particularly the family, had they not survived.
Quality of life is difficult to diagnose in the emergency room and in the dark tunnels entered by people who've suffered severe brain injury. In the same ward as Christine Darley-Jones is this man. John Merchant was a plumber from Essex, a world away from Christine Darley-Jones's city boardrooms.
You'd always be up front, enjoying yourself, dancing, having a joke with friends, just always centre attention, really. He's just really basically a fun-loving person, and always was the clown, really, if you like. I think our marriage was really good, very strong, and I was really happy, and John was. children were. And I once said to a friend that things are too good to be true. We're so happy, and it's so rare nowadays. I think something's going to come along and spoil it, and it did.
In November 1993, at the age of 39, John Merchant suffered a massive stroke. It caused brain damage which has left him completely incapacitated.
John has very severe disabilities which are visible easily. They include total immobility, difficulties in communication, inability to swallow, inability to control his bodily functions, being totally dependent for everyday activities.
John Merchant had suffered a brainstem stroke. At first, his wife Maria thought he would die. For days, she sat at his bedside in intensive care, knowing that he was brain damaged and fearing the worst. On the fourth day, something remarkable happened.
I've asked John if he could understand me, if he could, to blink twice for yes and once for no. And from then on, I knew that he could understand what I was saying, and we communicated with that. And he'd raise an eyebrow for I don't know. And 3 blinks would mean either yes or no sometimes.
Yes and no.
Yeah, yes
or
and
a bit
no.
of both.
Yeah.
So it's 1 blink is no,
Yeah.
2 blinks for yes.
Yeah.
John, did you at the outset fear that people wouldn't realise that everything was still working inside and that you were trying to communicate? Yes. So you must have thought, you must have been very frightened that people wouldn't realise that you were trying to communicate. Yeah. But there must be so many things you want to say, and it must be very frustrating, to put it mildly.
In John's case, you could make a list of all the terrible disabilities that he has and will have, and you might feel that this was a situation which people would wish to identify in an advance directive as a state that they could not tolerate.
Advance directives do mean taking a risk with your life. Generally, as in Christine Darley-Jones's case, a healthy person has to make a life or death choice about a hypothetical future situation. But are such choices made in advance what you would want later as a patient? Christine Darley-Jones's friends say she would not have changed her mind.
Hello, my flower.
Hello.
No.
I don't believe Chris knows who I am. When this first happened, she'd search my face with really imploring eyes, looking for an answer, looking to tell me. It felt to me as though she was saying to me, do you realise there's something wrong? Help me. I loathe to see my mate. She has no quality of life, she has no dignity at all. And that is never going to change, it worsens. And the very thing she was protecting herself against is here in sharp focus. And it should not be so.
Even Christine Darley-Jones's doctor, who believes her duty is to keep her patient alive, accepts that the precise terms of her advance directive have been met.
Doctor, does Christine Darley-Jones suffer from severe and lasting brain damage?
She does.
Has she become unable to participate effectively in decisions about her medical care?
Yes, sadly she has.
And would 2 physicians be of the opinion that she is unlikely to recover?
2 physicians experienced in this field, I think, would agree on that.
In that situation, her directions are, I am not to be subjected to any medical intervention or treatment aimed at prolonging or sustaining my life.
At the moment, her life is sustained, as is yours or mine, by the intake of food and fluid. And were we not to be given food and fluid, our lives would not be sustained normally.
But Christine Darley-Jones's feeding is not a normal or voluntary act. She won't swallow food or drink liquid. So to keep her alive, doctors had to insert a tube into her stomach. Is the feeding of a patient in such a way basic care, or does it amount to medical treatment? The law lords have already said it is treatment, in which case, since treatment was specifically refused by Mrs. Darley-Jones in her advance directive, are doctors within their rights to feed her in this way?
You are sustaining her life. You are doing that by feeding her every day through a tube.
Yes.
In law, is that treatment, since it is against her wishes, is that not an assault?
Certainly there are people, I don't subscribe to this group of people, who feel that feeding as such is a therapy as opposed to a cherishing and caring activity. The insertion of a feeding tube as such, without permission, is of course an assault, as is, for example, taking blood. This in fact was carried out prior to her admission to us, and I don't quite know under what circumstances permission was given. But in these cases where the patient isn't in a position to take his or her own decisions, their next of kin is very often asked to take decisions on their behalf, and I believe that that was the case with Mrs. Darley-Jones.
Peter Rayner has suffered pain and indignity for nearly half of his life. He would like to die now. For 27 years, he's suffered from the degenerative disease multiple sclerosis. He knows doctors won't help him to shorten his life as he would like, but he's dismayed that they could ignore his advance directive and prolong his life with treatment he wouldn't want.
I feel very angry. If a person has made a living well, what right has a doctor to presume to think he has the right to play God for himself?
Peter in trouble, good morning.
Like Christine Darley-Jones in her life in the city, Peter Rayner is used to taking decisions and to planning his own life. He runs his own travel agency in the Yorkshire town of Wetherby.
Lee's Bradford.
He was not too happy with
Despite an illness which has left him blind and crippled, he still goes to work at his office every day.
Dear Mr. Ross, further to your letter.
To Peter Rayner, an advance directive is a matter of personal prerogative. It is my life, my pain, and my death, he says, for which I will take responsibility.
You're saying, please listen to me, the patient, to my wishes. And please don't keep me alive beyond the point at which I wish to die.
Yes.
Just go and get your rug.
My condition has deteriorated,
Better?
and I now have to have everything done for me. I have to be put to bed, got up, washed, dressed, fed.
It's a bit big.
Peter Rayner had hoped Parliament would resolve a life and death issue like this, but so far it hasn't. Like many with degenerative diseases and disability, he feels people are ignoring his plight.
I didn't think it was very fair of him to say that we need a special table.
No.
I mean, they managed all right with the Chamber of Trade, didn't they? Should really have just said, well, we don't really want you there.
My distinct impression I got
Peter Rayner knows that at some point his disease will make it impossible for him to make his own wishes known. At that point, he would like his friend and employee, Jane Caress, to have the power to take medical decisions on his behalf.
I would do my utmost to make sure that if Peter wasn't able to say, that's it, pull the plugs, I would say, that's it, pull them. But it depends on the doctors as well.
So if you were his proxy, what would you say to the doctors?
Once Peter wasn't able to say for himself, I would say, that's it, don't treat him. Just make him comfortable, keep him warm.
You would, if necessary and if you had the power, take the decision to end his life?
Yes.
And Peter, is that what you would wish Jane to do?
Okay.
Peter Rayner wants to make choices now about his future. He's frustrated that his life cannot be ended. He's uncertain about the willingness of doctors to honour his advance directive. He's contemplating a desperate step.
Peter, if the advance direction was thwarted, what options would then be open to you?
Not really, with the exception of self-starvation.
And is that something that you would be forced to consider?
Yes. Yes.
Jane, you must hope very much that the doctors would not put Peter in a situation where he had to consider self-starvation.
Oh, well, yes, I mean, obviously, I would hope that Peter wouldn't, or will never have to go through self-starvation. But as things stand at the moment, that is the only alternative for Peter. And at the end of the day, that has to be Peter's choice. And I would stand by him while he did that choice.
While Peter Rayner wants advance directives to give the individual more power over the doctor, other cases show how risky it can be for a patient to have the right to tell doctors what to do. A year ago, Richard found that cancer had returned.
I just felt a nasty lump growing in my tummy. I could just sort of feel it there, and so I knew that something wasn't quite right. I decided I didn't want the treatment. I just wanted it to be over, you know, without any pain and suffering.
Under the law at the moment, that kind of direction from a rational patient who refuses specific treatment is something doctors cannot ignore.
We were faced with Richard getting iller in front of our eyes. He had been quite explicit in his refusal of consent to chemotherapy, and therefore we could not give him chemotherapy against his wishes because that would have been assault. He had said no.
So, for the best part of a year, Richard's doctors could do nothing as the cancer spread. By last December, his tumour was the size of a pineapple, and doctors were telling him he had days to live.
I was still pretty sure at the beginning. But when this tumour started growing and pressing, I changed my mind.
You've felt what the prospect of death was like, and it's...
Yeah, and I think life's the right choice.
Richard is now receiving the treatment he'd refused. He'd given his doctors a valid direction which, in this situation, they'd had to follow. If he'd lost consciousness before his change of mind, his doctors would still have been bound by his wishes, and he would have died. Despite all the doctors' efforts to explain the situation, Richard hadn't understood that new treatments would shrink his tumour with fewer side effects.
When we first started your chemotherapy,
Yeah.
I mean, not only could we feel the lump, we could actually see it in your tummy.
Yeah, that's it.
And now, it's, as you can see, as you know yourself, it's
Yeah.
flattened off very nicely.
Yeah.
Cases like Richard's force doctors to wonder whether it is wise to extend the individual's right to refuse treatment through advance directives.
That was excellent, that was. It was a very nice surprise, honestly. I should have listened to you in the beginning. Just been pig-headed.
Glad we've got on with it.
Yeah, so am I now.
He came as close to death as I think he could have done with his tumour. I think it's conceivable that a few more days even without giving him treatment would have meant that he would have died.
It is questionable, you are suggesting, whether the patient can ever really know what is best for him.
Well, I think sometimes one wonders whether there really is ever any such thing as really informed consent.
Locked into his paralysed body, John Merchant is going home to spend a rare weekend with his family. Doctors say he is unlikely ever to emerge from the locked-in syndrome from which he suffers. His useless body will imprison a thinking mind for the rest of his life. Which of us really knows in advance whether we could cope with disabilities like his? Doctors say an advance directive is tantamount to never knowing. It means giving up.
The mirror. You spotted that? Jodie went down the market and got that yesterday. And when she come home with that big one, I said, oh, I won't put that upstairs, that's nice, I'll have it down here. Do you like it? Yeah. Well, you can see it all right then. Good.
Listen to John Merchant. When he blinks once, he is saying no. When he blinks twice, he is saying yes.
John, all we can see is your eye blinking. But behind that eye, do you understand everything that is going on? And do you understand the full extent of the physical disability which your stroke has left you with? John, if before your stroke you'd been able to see into the future and you'd been able to see what was going to happen to you, might you have been tempted to instruct your doctors to please switch me off? You wouldn't. But can you understand that many people watching you might be tempted to think, I would sooner be dead than like that? Have there been times when you've felt you've wanted to die? John, if here in my hand I had a switch, and if with that switch I could turn off your life now, would you want me to turn that switch? You want to live? Life, for you, even with all the difficulties that you face, has a meaning and a purpose. And is the reason that you want to live the love of Maria and of your family?
There's a dog. Still got
thing, isn't it?
Still got 2 shots.
Should I take it off and put it back on?
So 2 shots. 4. You know when
It's because your body's too much over here.
Right?
Just leave it like that. No.
Yeah, I stayed up 2 nights. Oh, what a plum!
So I'll get Mum to do it.
Yash, no.
It's all right writing these wills while you're well, but when you're actually in the position, and like John, your outlook's totally different. I mean, John's living proof of it. He's still got a life. He still sees his children. And where there's life, there's hope. So, no, I don't really agree with him.
It's as John himself said, never give up.
Yeah, you can never give up. You've got to keep fighting and hope for the best. Keep fighting.
It's my fear that unless people know a great deal about this sort of area of, for example, brain injury, that the way that documents might be drawn up could be seen to describe someone such as John, who, as we know, has every reason to want to get back home and live his life and be a father and husband.
So do you regard an advance directive as potentially a dangerous document?
As envisaged at the moment, I believe I do.
At the Royal Hospital for Neurodisability, where John Merchant and Christine Darley-Jones are patients, lives are sustained in a state which many might regard as being worse than death.
It's a habit I'm not sure I like, starting to talk about her all the time in the past tense.
I was thinking about that the other day. Mustn't
They
do it.
tell me that she isn't.
People who knew Christine Darley-Jones before remember a phrase she often used: "I can't be doing with this." She was that kind of woman. She liked things to be right. Elaine Sharp used to cut Christine's hair when she was a carefully groomed city executive. She still comes every few weeks to cut the hair of a woman who became a friend.
She was too full of character. She was too full of life to have wanted to have lived in this state, really.
So long as doctors continue to feed her, Christine Darley-Jones could live like this for many years. Her case raises complex ethical and legal issues, but above all, for the person who's shared her life for 25 years, she represents a heartbreaking dilemma.
You couldn't countenance any step which would mean the withdrawal of treatment, medication or food?
No, not at this moment in time. How could you they tell me they can starve her. Instead of feeding her the solution through the tube in her tummy, they feed her glucose and water. But apparently it takes 6 or 7 weeks before they die. They don't apparently suffer. They just don't get the nutriment, so they just gradually fade away. But how could you watch someone you love every day and starving to death? I mean, it's unreal, you know. I mean, could you do that to someone?
Christine Darley-Jones, the ever-efficient planner, left her husband a letter to be opened in the event of her death. He already has it.
Hello, Toe. If you are reading this, I shall, of course, be watching from afar. Whatever happens to you in the future, remember that once someone loved you more than words could express. Someone was more proud of you than you ever knew.
And someone was grateful for making her such a happy girl for so long. Thank you, darling, for everything.
Please be happy. You do so deserve it. All my love, Chrissy.
Christine Darley-Jones signed an advance directive because she wanted peace for her husband and dignity for herself.
How will you remember her?
Oh, as my best mate. Yeah.
And when you see her now, what do you think? So?
I want her to die. Because she has gone. And I want her dignity in place.
You want her wish to be honoured?
Yeah. It's the best we can do for her. She deserves it. She deserves it.
While it may seem that one is ignoring her wishes, what one is trying to do is to take the family, in this case one person's wishes, into consideration, while acknowledging that the patient herself might have wished differently.
If there was one question that you could ask her now, what would that be?
Am I forgiven? Am I forgiven for not carrying out your wishes, even if it meant going to prison? And what would you like to happen to you? Yeah. That's... But she can't speak.
What do you think she would have wanted to happen?
I think she'd like to be put away, to be terminated.
Her wishes to be carried out?
Yeah. I'm sure she would. It's selfishness on my part. I like seeing her.
Christine Darley-Jones's advance directive was an expression of herself, of her confidence as an individual, and of her love for a husband she did not want to burden. She believed she knew what was best for them both, but medicine and the law would not listen to her.
I wish it to be understood that I fear degeneration and indignity far more than I fear death. I ask my medical attendants to bear this statement in mind when considering what my intentions would be in any uncertain situation.